Welcome, everybody, to today's episode on Subject Shift. And today we'll be covering work focus and that balance. And today, who will be joining me is Miss Shaw. Miss Shaw, would you like to take it away?
Sure. My name is Patricia Shaw. I'm an occupational therapist and longtime homeschool mom. And I think you asked me to talk about this just because of mainly not as much about my homeschool or any kind of outside life, but because of my profession of occupational
Right.
therapy. So I thought I'd kind of tell everybody what that is.
Mm-hmm.
An occupational therapist is a person who works with a variety of ages and stages of life. We work with clients or patients in a variety of settings to help them to achieve their goals, maybe to rehabilitate, figure out a way to compensate or adapt after an injury, or perhaps if that client has um, developmental delays, we work with them to get to a point where they're able to function at a level that they can engage with the rest of the world,
Mm-hmm.
within their family, within their community, and can be such a fulfilling job in itself.
Right.
But we sometimes some of us call when we think of occupation and we think of we're really looking at how a person occupies their time.
Right.
So, depending on a person's age, depending on their stage, or maybe depending on their injury or where we're seeing them, we look at how can we get someone to a place that they can occupy their time in a meaningful, fulfilling way, fulfill their life's purpose, really,
Mm-hmm.
you know. Kind of a philosophical
Right?
change when you think
Yeah,
of,
that
you
sounds
know,
pretty.
when you think of the medical world.
Yeah, that
It
sounds
comes
pretty
down to,
deep.
it's probably the most philosophical attempt at,
Yeah, therapy.
yeah, meeting a person where they're at,
Yeah.
So I really enjoy it. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah, awesome. Well, let's get started.
Sure.
So, the first question today is how can you have a proper balance of work, rest, and entertainment in your schedule?
Okay. Well, again, that is dependent on a person's age and stage of their life. In our younger years, we have a different focus depending on the developmental level that we're at. So, for a child, in infancy, that child only cares about eating, really.
Mm,
Eating, resting, exploring, right?
right?
As therapists, I'm looking at, does this child have the ability to suck, swallow, and breathe properly?
Mm-hmm.
Are they able to attach to that mom and dad? Are the parents feeling competent and secure, confident in how they're being able to approach that child? When I'm working with a kid in, toddler, young childhood age, their focus is on play, right?
Mm-hmm.
Play and exploration. And then when they move on into, the elementary ages, they're more concerned with play again.
Mm-hmm.
Their teachers think otherwise. They want them they want them to learn. So sometimes, as a school therapist, I might come in and I might be looking at academics, but also I'm looking at self-regulation. Does that child have the ability to regulate in a classroom full of an immense amount of diversions and sensory input and that sort of thing? So can I help that kid in that area? And then a child that is more in the middle school years, they're getting to the point where they're like, oh, okay, I understand all these subjects, but now I have big questions, you know? And so their focus is going to not be as much play as it is work and like more meaningful social engagement. Sometimes in those middle school years, we get to a point where we also are interested in work. When I'm working with kids that are autistic, for instance, I really push those families to think about how can that child have a structured way to work. Everyone needs to feel like they are needed and wanted and expected to deliver, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I like by age 12 um, for a child to understand that importance of work. And then as you get a little bit older, high school and then into college, man, it's such a juggle, trying to figure out, how do I enjoy that social, that continued exploration or play, right? Looks very different from a young child. Now we're looking at things that might be more poetic or artistic in nature. And definitely we're looking at work. And we're also in that poetic time, we're thinking about what is the meaning of life and what is my purpose? What is my essential purpose? And that's where we actually are pursuing more rest. As we're younger, we're like, oh, rest is for all those old people, right? Well, as you get a little older, a little more wise, you decide, maybe rest is not so bad, right?
Yeah, I definitely agree.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean, who doesn't enjoy a nap, once you get to upperclassman age? So anyway, so, it depends on where you're at, age and stage of where that focus will be. And so when you think of a proper balance, we think of who am I and what am I about? So knowing thyself, right?
Mm-hmm.
We want to know, where am I? What are my goals? What am I pursuing at this time? And then once I kind of have that understanding, then I decide, how am I intentionally going to pursue that in my life? How do I keep from things that might distract me in order to pursue that proper balance of work, rest, and social or entertainment?
Right. And earlier you said about age 12, you like them to understand the meaningfulness of work. So how would you increase work efficiency, or what are some ways that you help people, increase their efficiency in working?
Okay. I think we talked a little bit about flow state, a little bit about, I think that's kind of a buzzword these days, right? So in therapy, we were taught that when someone is in the state of flow, that's a time where you're at the height of efficiency and engagement with a task.
Mm-hmm.
And so, as an occupational therapist, man, I want people to get to that place of meaningful engagement with tasks that are important to them.
Mm-hmm.
I think of that as meaningful occupation, right? That's why I think it's so important. I love my my own occupation of occupational therapy, because we're thinking about that meaningful movement toward accomplishing set goals in our work. And so for me, as I'm working with someone that perhaps has some difficulties with self-regulation, where they are constantly distracted,
mm-hmm.
or someone that maybe is not used to sitting, but yet they need to sit at a computer and complete that, school task. Or perhaps it is the distracted parent that can't figure out how to balance, providing those meals, and maybe they've had a brain injury or something like that, and they're not able to focus on that task.
Mm-hmm.
How can we get them to that flow state where they can actually attack that task, complete that task, and find meaning in and purpose in what they just did? And so some ways to do that really, to me, is just being able to set those boundaries, in that this is my purpose, these are my goals, and then how do I attack those without the distractions? How can I do that without even my body distracting me, right?
Right.
How do I do that within the community, that maybe I have to pursue those tasks? Or how do I do that within the home with distractions? Mm-hmm. How do I do that? So you kind of have to look at not just inwardly. I think that's where you start first. That's your foundation, is inwardly, what am I trying to accomplish? And then how do I attack that? in a way that I can be focused. So I don't know if you want me to go into specifics. Do you want me to go into specifics?
Well, if you'd like, yeah.
Okay, well, so some specifics that I love, right? Some specifics. So for the person that gets highly distracted, probably the leading distractor in American society anyway is screens.
Right.
And so I really, really, really like screen time limits. So there's things you can do if you've got an iPhone. I'm sure there's something similar on Androids, right? Yeah. Where you can have limitations on things like your social time, your social media time. You can have limitations on the time that you spend on listening to music. You can have limitations on listening to podcasts. Your phone can tell you how much time you're spending on there, and from there you can set goals. You can say, hey man, I'm spending 4 hours a day. What? Looking at this, what am I going to do? I thought that, I'm having difficulty spending 15 minutes on math when I get home. How do I increase that? Well, maybe it's decreasing all those distractions. So I like using, for that primary distractor on screens, I like to use what is there, and that is, can I turn off notifications? Can I put limitations on the time that I use? And if I can't do that, maybe I need a screen fast. I don't know if you've heard of that. Maybe a screen fast that where I just learn to go without. That's helpful, I think. And then there's other things that you can do as far as when you are pursuing a certain goal and you've got to sit down or that you need to spend time doing something that you would rather avoid, to use an outside helper like a timer. I love a kitchen timer, maybe I need to work. I know that I can't work more than 5 minutes. Well, I'm going to set myself to 5 minutes and see how I do. Maybe I want to stretch myself and go that 6-7 minutes. Okay, maybe I need to stretch it to 15, right? And if I can do that, I can build up that resilience, for that task. And resilience is a big deal. You want to be able to stretch yourself and do those things that are important to you, but maybe a little bit difficult. And having some of those outside helps are very helpful. You can also have, if you have a community of people that you're like, you know what? I have a friend that is really good. They are super good at sticking to their schedule, or they are super good at being a person that achieves. I'm going to talk with them and ask them maybe to come alongside me to give me some encouragement.
Yeah, like a study buddy.
Right, having a study buddy, having someone that checks in on you, not someone that polices you. I don't think that ever works. Yeah. But maybe having somebody that actually is just an encouragement to you of like, hey, how did it go? Like, tell me, it's Saturday, and you said by Saturday you're going to try to do this. How are you doing? How do we celebrate for this? Oh, we might celebrate with, let's go for a walk. Let's go to the park. Let's talk about it. So I think having that component of someone that encourages you is another way to build in some of those reinforcers to accomplish those goals that you are able to achieve through what a lot of people call flow state.
Yeah. And I've personally, over this semester specifically, I've definitely been focusing on like trying time management mostly because I have, let's just say, a problem with procrastinating. So yeah, I definitely agree. Minimizing screen time. I'll delete certain apps for certain times like an app fast, I guess. So like currently, I don't have Instagram.
Kudos to you.
Yeah, I don't have like the majority of social media. I think the most I have currently is like Pinterest. But Pinterest is an exception, I like to say, because they have like fun things and you can like it's still knowledgeable and stuff. But I'll have those little app fasts. So if you can't really do that full screen time, an app fast is like a great way. If you notice, hey, there's like this certain app I'm spending a bunch of time on. I need a break from it. So if just like deleting that app for like a day or even just a few hours to kind of build yourself up on that resilience you talked about.
Mm-hmm.
And I've kind of found the hardest thing is like starting it. Like
Right.
that beginning stage is like probably the most difficult part,
Mm-hmm.
is what I've noticed, because I used to be very like, I kind of just slacked off, but like lately I've been like, I've noticed, the results and like the increasing how things get easier.
Mm-hmm.
Another thing I'd suggest is Pomodoro. Kind of what you said with like that timer of like building up that resilience. Pomodoro. YouTube has a bunch of fun little, like, they'll make it very scenery or very nice, pretty. And they'll have like these little like timers, and it'll make like a little ding when you're done, and then you
Mm-hmm.
take that break, make a ding when you need to start again. I find that very, very helpful for me as well, as someone who does struggle to focus completely.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of like having a study buddy, except you know you don't.
Yeah.
It's on
Right.
the screen.
Mm-hmm.
So those are definitely some things. If you feel like you can't quite build yourself up onto those like screen fasts, those like just those little steps. And then one last thing that I've kind of had the ability to resource. I haven't finished the book, but the book called Flow by Mihaly C.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so far, from what I've read, he's done a very good job on like explaining what flow state is and what exactly you need to do.
Mm-hmm.
So that book pretty much goes over the entire flow state of
Mm-hmm.
everything.
Very nice. Yeah. I'm not as familiar with, I mean, I've heard of, but I've not read the books.
Mm-hmm.
So it sounds really familiar to a theory model that I was trained in when I was going to therapy school back in the dinosaur ages.
Oh.
So yeah. That model is called the occupational adaptation model. And so what it would talk about is, the main purpose was to show how someone in their occupation, how do they accomplish a task and achieve um, a task that's important to them in the most efficient way. And it shows how, sometimes you might get caught up in either, a mode of difficulty or distraction. And so you're familiar with the fight fight or flight, fright,
Yeah.
mode where, you might get caught. You're like, oh, this maybe this task is too difficult. Maybe I can't initiate because I'm not sure where to go, or you know what, this is too much for me, so I'm just going to go distract myself with maybe a bag of Cheetos. So when you're in that time of, I really want to initiate this task. I really want to initiate this new opportunity, and yet I can't get started. It is very important, I think, for us to know ourselves and say, okay, what's tripping me up? Am I fearful? Am I um, am I not focused? Is there something that's keeping me from being focused? And then, once I am able to attack that, I can move on to those things that I want to initiate. But I have to be intentional. I have to put the effort into it. So I think a lot of that is valuable. So
Mm-hmm.
So those outside helps, definitely very, very helpful. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And then for like high school, to college, I find it, even as I'm getting more efficient in my studies,
Mm-hmm.
I still sometimes struggle. Like, I currently have a part-time job with, other things. Some people have what, like, ath- athletes have like races or other things they have in their schedule. So it's a lot more compact and
Mm-hmm.
difficult. So how would you say, with the people with busier schedules, how would you say that like they should not like overwork themselves or avoid overworking themselves?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to directly answer that question in just a second. First, I want to point out that there are times in your life that you can't avoid overwork, right? So there are times in our lives, especially I think in that teenage to young adult time of life where, man, there's those expectations are super crazy. You've got to read 80 chapters on microbiology. You have to write 3 research papers, and they're all 10 to 15 pages long. You've got to put in your 15 hours at your work study. You've got to figure out a way to, walk the dog and eat food. So, there's sometimes you get to a point where overwork is almost unavoidable. However, you have to, it's a good idea to know yourself and know what you're getting into. So again, like in that initial stage of, okay, so I'm going to take some really tough classes. How am I going to set myself up for not failure, but excellence? How am I going to set myself up? So again, I think it takes that initial work, that framework for an individual to avoid overwork. So a lot of times it's that hard first couple of days into a new opportunity, rather than long amounts, a long semester of stress. So if you'll spend those hard first days of going through, what am I about to attack? How can I put a work schedule together? This work schedule that worked for me in high school does not work for me any longer, right? In college. That schedule that I had in high school, where maybe my mom stepped in a lot, or my dad came in and checked in on me, or my teachers told me what to do each week, that's gone. Now I'm in a place where I have to be a little bit more independent. So that comfort, that familiarity that maybe we had before, that let us achieve before, may change. And with change comes a lot more stress. You can avoid that stress. You can avoid that overburden by setting yourself up with, okay, what am I about to attack? And how can I structure it to best fit my life? And sometimes it may be a little bit more than you anticipated, but for the most part, things like so in homeschooling, for instance, I taught my kids to look at everything early in the week. So let's do most of our work early. Let's see how much we can get done that Monday and Tuesday, and that way Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, that's a breeze because we did so much of that early work in the week. So if you up front are engaging in a difficult task, you have time to review and reflect as it gets closer to completing that task. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So just kind of mainly just time management of just like making sure you get things done early. You aren't like you aren't overworking yourself or cramming or procrastinating.
Yeah.
I'm guilty of.
Yeah, and and don't beat yourself up in that. And if you find yourself like in a place where you're like, oh my goodness, life is about to fall apart because I have procrastinated. It may be that you have to scale back and look at what you have accomplished, and be able to maybe pick apart what is necessary and what's not necessary in that time of realization, right? So, I would say, don't beat yourself up, because the very fact that you're even thinking about, okay, I've procrastinated, what are we going to do today? Right. I mean, great, yay! We're thinking. We're gonna restructure now, right?
Yeah, we got to like acknowledging the issue and then addressing it and making a plan to, I guess, fix the issue.
Right. And so the earlier you can recognize that maybe you procrastinated, or the earlier you can recognize that there were just some distractions, the earlier you can make a new change. Maybe you did a really good job this first couple of days of a new semester, and had everything all planned out, but it all was maybe a little rosy, maybe a little too easy. Maybe you really should have set those standards a little higher at the early part of that semester. and you realize about mid-semester, oh my goodness, there's so much more work to be done. It may be time to scale back. Maybe time to scale back in social, maybe time to scale back in those things that distract you. I think that's probably the most common thing for a young adult is, what are those distractions? And also maybe not focusing on a proper balance or structure of rest. So, most people that have a good sleep schedule are people that intentionally decide they're going to go to sleep at a certain time each night, and they're going to wake up at a certain time each morning, right? They're the ones that statistically have the best, sleep schedule and a lot more mental clarity. So, that may be something to reevaluate as well.
Right. So sleeping. I assume eating because I haven't really
Right.
I haven't tried to study while hungry. Though I'm sure it's unpleasant. And you kind of mentioned like having a like snack if you're feeling like especially worried. Um, and then after that, you kind of talked, after that like Monday, Tuesday of like intense work, those like Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, it's kind of like a break day or rest. But how would you say, like, what are some good resting methods or ways to rest besides your phone? Because I find when I am like scrolling through Pinterest or doom scrolling, as a lot of people say, it's mainly because I do need like that rest, but I feel like being rested is like too unproductive. So what are some like good ways to rest without that phone?
Yeah. So, I think about, screen time and, doom scrolling. I think about that as just a really cheap way to get some happy hormones going in our brain. Yeah. So, and so you have to think about, well, what ways have we done that in the past? Have we done that? Some people do, a refresher. They'll do maybe a 15-minute power nap. That's helpful for some people. I like sunshine. I think sunshine and a little walk around the block is very good. When my kids were younger, I had a whole setup for our outside play for breaks. My kids had a lot of energy, and so we would take 15-minute breaks to go play on the monkey bars. I'd have just an obstacle course, so monkey bars, rope, climbing the tree, run around, run races, jumping ropes, getting on the trampoline. All those little things to just help with some of that regulation. So you have to think about in terms of regulation. You think about okay, so do I need to regulate because I have low energy? Well, if you have low energy, then what you need to do is maybe, get outside for that brisk walk, maybe do some push-ups, maybe do some jumping jacks, maybe get your jump rope out. Some of those high energy activities are very helpful. However, if you find that in your stressful time, my body runs real high. So maybe all of a sudden I'm distracting myself by cleaning the tub all of a sudden, or I have a burning desire to reorganize my closet. I'm distracting myself by some of those things that I actually have really high energy. I've got to get around the house and I've got to dust everything. I've got to get all these calls made. Like, you're distracting yourself with you need to recognize that maybe it's your regulation is out of whack. And so in those times, it may be that you need to maybe get on a swing. You may need to take that 15-minute nap. You may recognize that you haven't maybe eaten, and so maybe you need to go get that nice little munchy snack in there. Maybe you could get some celery and some carrots and go to town, right? So for a lot of times, you have to kind of just know yourself and be thoughtful of, where am I? What can I do to stop and take a meaningful break? And what is my body needing right now? Is my body needing rest? Is my body needing nutrition? Am I staying hydrated? Right? Am I in need of some sunshine and a little bit of a walk? What kind of physical activity is my body needing right now? And so being able to already have those tasks. I actually used to have a list. Okay, so if you're feeling this way, this is what we need to go do. So it was just a real easy, um, way to go. Okay, we need to take a body break. What are we going to do?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then kind of more on like switching to like the play aspect of this episode. Mm-hmm. I know there's like, I figured out the hard way. Taking like at least like one day off or like half a day off. It's like, it's really important within like a week, because otherwise things just like pile on top of each other, and like you eventually just can't find yourself like within that week of like taking a single break, and then that week becomes like 3 weeks, and then you're just like, you just end up like so tired and burnt out from that day, or well, that, I guess, session or month. So with that, what are like some things you can do within those days that like you can kind of like rest and recharge, but like not just stay at home all day, or just stay on your phone?
Yeah. So I agree. I really like a day of the week. People that follow things, that follow the Bible. They understand that concept of a day of rest, right? And I think, as the science gets even more, in depth with that kind of concept, I think we find that our bodies are in need of that day of the week of rest. Now, again, there are times that you're just, you're in a time of life where there's going to be overwork, a new kid, you might be a new parent, you might be a new student, that, maybe a new worker, and that overwork is something that happens. You may not get a day off for, 19 days, right? But it is important to try to reframe that as much as you possibly can, to set aside days for rest, and in that time of rest, for a believer like me, that day of rest typically is okay. I'm setting my time not to do what is my norm. So my norm is, for me personally, is, I might work half a day and then I'm schooling my child half a day. I might be traveling to go teach other people's kids for half a day. My norm is super busy from about, 7 in the morning until 6 at night. So I've got pretty long days. My day off, my day of rest typically includes, I'm not working on, schooling. I'm not working on my occupational therapy job. I am not working as a debate coach. I am spending time with family. I'm spending time in worship. I might take a nice long nap in the afternoon. I might take extra walks. Some things that you can do too is, you can change up if you have a physical fitness schedule. That it's important for our bodies to kind of change that up too, and not get used to the same thing day to day. And so on that day of rest, it can be a complete day of rest where you're not doing anything like super fit, but maybe going for a nice slow stroll, or going to feed ducks, or go on that picnic, or that sort of thing. It might be that you spend that day doing some stretching. Maybe you go get a massage. Maybe you go spend some time in a sauna. Those are things that just help the body to relax and recharge, and before we begin that Monday, or that proverbial Monday.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then I guess this is kind of, we've been talking mainly about like finding your priorities and like getting them straight. So I guess, would that be, how would you manage to find time for things you enjoy, like with socializing, even with those like those cram weeks of like you don't have a break until like 19 days after the job you've applied for or something? How would you find those days? Because I find that when I have like a very busy schedule, I find it hard. Like, let's say I get home after work, I'm like too tired to really do anything, so I go straight to bed. Wake up the next day, I have to do school or work or whatever again, and then just have a whole day packed again, sleep,
Mm-hmm.
repeat. And I can find that can be very, very tiring, especially
Mm-hmm.
mentally.
Mm-hmm.
So like what are those like little like pick me ups that
Don't
you
pick
can
me
kind
ups. Yeah, so again, like the walks, the outside, I think sunshine. We most Americans have a very low vitamin D. We need some outside time, right? For some that's taking a hot bath, maybe a time in the sauna if you've got that available to you. We're meant to sweat.
of
So, it's not just great for, for our physical self of just releasing toxins, but it's so good for us in terms of just being able to release and renew. So, one thing that I really like is music. So, especially in that time of high school and college, career, early career, you are, on the go, and uh, typically, the mind is firing on all cylinders in certain areas of the brain. So, if you're thinking in terms of like you're doing a lot of math, um, that same area of the brain also controls logic and also controls music. And so I like to shift that a little bit. I like to shift it over to music. If you can't get that hard calculus question taken care of, go play your instrument. If you can't play an instrument, go and sing at the top of your lungs to some fun little song that you love and is just exciting for you. So shift over to music. Might take you 10-15 minutes. Go shift over there, then come back to that hard problem, that hard, more difficult activity, and see if that helps a little bit. I think Einstein put that into practice. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Get to a hard spot, go play some music, come on back. Hey, if it worked for Einstein, it'll work for you.
Einstein,
Yeah. Yeah. So and we have to have those breaks. Some really notable people that used those type of breaks. So Einstein, I know, used those. Um, throughout history, there's one. Have you ever heard of Dietrich Bonhoeffer? No.
I don't think so.
Oh man, pretty cool guy. So his family actually would invite people over. I think on Saturdays they would come over to his house, and they would invite friends and family to come over, and they would play music. They would put on skits. They would play cards or games. They would, have food together, break bread. And in those times, that was part of their rest ritual, was to get with other people and have that social time together, and together, congregate with music. I think that's change it up a little bit. I think it's a great idea.
Yeah, definitely.
Mm-hmm.
And like I found that earlier you kind of said like, high school, early like college, early career,
Mm-hmm.
that like between those times it's kind of hard to find rest. But like what are some of the main differences between like your adult life and your teen life, and like kind of like that transition of
Mm-hmm.
like between like you're a teenager and you're graduating high school and you're kind of like transferring into an adult now.
Mm-hmm, right. Maybe this is an old lady answer. Maybe not necessarily um, occupational therapist, kind of answer. But really, I think the big difference is between an adult and teen life is the idea of comfort and goals. So, teens for the most part are focused on their relationships. It's a really big deal. They're made to focus a lot of times on achieving in academics or sports. And then some are beginning to have jobs that are really important to them, where they're making money toward, buying that first car or getting ready for school, or that sort of thing. And so they have jobs that they're beginning, but they're not jobs that provide for what I would call the four walls. I think maybe Dave Ramsey or one of those like
Right.
money guys.
People.
One of those money guys. They talk about the four walls, and the four walls are taking care of your shelter and your what you're going to eat and are the lights on and that sort of thing. Well, a teenager ought not to have to worry about that, right?
Yeah.
Now that's in America, that's the hope, right? That a teenager shouldn't have to do it. No, so that's not necessarily all teenagers. There are teenagers I know for sure that are out there and having to help provide for the family, okay? And that's just a necessary thing. But for the most part, teens typically have that comfort and security of a family that is able to provide for that, and you don't have to worry about where your next meal is coming, whether the lights are going to work when you get home, how you're going to attempt to get to your parents, if there's a crisis. You're not worried about that, right? All that's that's a burden for another day, right? Well, once you become a young adult and you have launched, right? You now are in a state of having to figure out that it becomes very acute. You're acutely aware of what it takes to run a household, and then also to take care of yourself. So that might be, now you truly, even if you were taught before, now you are truly setting the pencil to the paper, of putting a budget together, figuring out how you're going to get your meals, how are you going to afford those meals, how are you going to take care of the car and the maintenance, how are you going to make sure to pay for that next semester in school, maybe how are you going to make sure that you have the time to go to that new job. And so those young adults now, they're not necessarily as focused on relationships for the most part. I think when you look at social media or you look at maybe TV series, you get the idea that young adults actually, like on Friends, like sit around at breakfast time and talk before they go to work. That's like the biggest lie ever. Like, that doesn't really happen, okay? That's for retirement years.
Right.
When you're a young adult, like unless you are really intentional of like, this is what I'm going to accomplish before I go to work. Most of the time you're heading out, like trying to figure out how you're going to get all the stuff done for your college classes, or all the stuff done for getting your work done. Maybe as a young adult, you have a young child and now you're having to take care of that child as well. And so that comfort is now replaced with true responsibility. And so a big, big difference. And for a lot of people that really scares them, but I think it's an opportunity for, when you launch, it's an opportunity for tremendous growth. It shouldn't be avoided too late. Someone that, waits until their late 20s, their early 30s to leave home, they're missed out on many years of opportunity of figuring out how to do all those simple but maybe scary kind of activities of like, okay, I actually have to pay for gas and water. Okay, we got to put that in the budget. It's not a time of like saving every penny and still living underneath the roof of someone else. Because free is not free, really. Right.
Yeah. There's no such thing as a free lunch.
There's no such thing. It is never. It may be free to you, but it is not free to someone, right? Yeah. Someone's providing for that. So I think the earlier that a young adult can launch and can take on those responsibilities and do it in a very thoughtful way, their opportunity for growth and achieving is so much greater than someone that may be stuck in that teen mentality of, everything's provided. I'm just going to stay here, So anyway, so much different in terms of adult and teen life. And I think it all comes down to the need for, your goals change.
Right.
And within those goals, security, you've got a lot more liberty as an adult, but also maybe a little bit less security unless you're providing it for yourself.
Yeah. And you kind of mentioned in like when you're more of a teenager, you're focusing on those relationships more. But how do you maintain relationships when life gets busy? Because, like we've talked about a lot, is high school can get very chaotic very quickly. So how do you maintain those relationships?
I think a lot of that comes down to boundaries and figuring out who you are and who your people are. I think social media for your generation has kind of shifted that understanding of who are my friends, who is important to me. So in social media, you might feel like, oh, all of a sudden I think I'm really popular with this set of people. Well, sometimes that set of people has a little too much time on their hands, right?
Yeah.
So, they're not maybe necessarily true friends. The true friend is going to be someone that you can depend on, that checks in on you, but also someone that you find important enough in terms of this person has very similar goals to me. This person has a similar worldview to me, and we're kind of going in the same places. And this person is a life giver, not a life sucker. Right. Does that make sense? Yeah. And so you kind of have to know yourself and also know what you're about and where you're going, and then determine who those friends are that you want to make that effort with. You need to kind of figure that out because you cannot be all things to all people. And the earlier you figure that out, the better it is for developing those really great, beautiful relationships that can last you decades. Out of all those years of public school for me, I have one friend that I can rely on out of all those years, and she doesn't even live near me. But if I called her today and said, life has just fallen apart, I need you, she'd be here. She'd be here, right? So if Beth is listening, she knows it's her. And then in young adult life, a lot of times you create a completely new set almost every time you go into a new career or a new stage. So in college, you'll make some friends. You may not keep any of those. You may keep one. Your first job, you may be friendly with everyone, but maybe make one or two friends that stick for the rest of your life. Early life as a parent, you may make a lot of other young mom friends, and it's just one or two that you could call out of the blue in your 40s and 50s, right? And so you kind of figure out who is in the same kind of age stage mindset as me, and I'm going to put that effort into it. So if you want to maintain those relationships, it comes down to intentionality. You have to put effort into it. That goes with friends as well as family. Yep.
Yeah. So as we're wrapping up for this episode, just kind of a few key takeaways. I would, from what I've taken away, is just kind of knowing what your priorities are in your current stage of life, and just knowing your limit, and especially we talked about earlier in the episode having a study buddy, and having those positive influences and those friends you can rely on, but also maintaining them as you kind of transition between high school, going into college, and taking on those responsibilities. So are there any key points you would like the listener to know before we conclude this episode?
I think I would say, especially for the young adult or the kid that is in their upperclassmen years, spend time on reflecting on who you are and what is important to you. Ask some big questions of yourself. What is important to me, and what are my life goals? As my own kids age, or maybe the kids that I've taught over the years, I ask them, what you're 17 right now. What is your 27-year-old self going to say? Are they going to say, man, you tried so hard, you did such a good job? Or are they going to say, man, you spent an incredible amount, almost a part-time job on diversions. If we had just focused a little bit more, we could have gotten to XYZ. Or they might have said, man, you spent far too much time worrying about relationships or being a certain type of person that you were you really kind of set yourself up to be. At 27, you look back and you reflect and you say, I did well. I made those friends. I rested well. I played well. I worked well. I did the best I could. And hey, look here. Maybe not so hard anymore, right?
Yeah. Well, awesome. Thank you so much for talking to me and just discussing this subject. This wraps it up for this episode. I hope you guys enjoyed, and if you have any comments or questions, you can email us at subject.shift24@gmail.com. And again, you can find us on YouTube or Spotify. And I hope you guys enjoyed this episode, and I'll see you in the next one.